In the drawing room at Royal Lodge in the mid-1930s, a lady-in-waiting watched the Duchess of York kneel to fix a ribbon in Margaret Rose's hair while barely glancing at her elder daughter, Elizabeth, and for decades the household could never square why the mother who fussed over Margaret was the very woman who would one day refuse her everything she wanted. If this account has been useful, subscribing costs nothing, and more stories like this one are already queued. The bell means you will actually see them. Hold on to that ribbon. By the end, you will understand why it never let Margaret go. Picture the room the way the lady-in-waiting described it later. Late afternoon light. 2 small girls in matching coats waiting to be looked at. The younger one fidgets, talks, performs a little even when no one has asked. The elder one stands quietly, hands folded, composed the way a child is only composed when she has learned that stillness is expected of her. The mother crosses to the younger girl. She kneels. She takes the loose ribbon in Margaret's hair and she ties it again, carefully, tenderly, murmuring something that makes the child laugh. And the whole time, the elder daughter waits. No one adjusts her ribbon. No one needs to. She is already correct. She is already the sensible one. And so, calmly, without a flicker of unkindness, she is overlooked. That is the scene. It is small. It is domestic. It is the kind of thing that happens in 1,000 nurseries and means nothing, except this nursery belonged to a family that would soon inherit a throne, and the 2 girls in those matching coats were about to be pulled toward 2 completely opposite lives. Here is the strange part, the contradiction that staff turned over in their minds for years. If you had asked anyone in that household who the mother preferred, they would not have hesitated. It was Margaret. Plainly, obviously Margaret. The servants called her the pet. They called her the joy. She was the one who lit up the dinner table, the one the Duchess called her happiness out loud in front of guests. By every visible measure, Margaret was the favorite child. So why does the story end with a phrase like, never her favorite? Because being adored and being favored are not the same thing. And the gap between those 2 words is the whole of this story. The mother laughed with one daughter, the mother invested in the other, and when the day came that Margaret needed her mother to choose her, to actually fight for her, the woman who had knelt to fix her ribbon would go silent and let her lose the thing she wanted most in the world. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. First, you have to understand who these 2 girls actually were, because almost everything that went wrong later was already visible in the nursery. Elizabeth was born in 1926, steady from the start. The kind of child who lined up her toy horses in neat rows and fed them and groomed them and would not go to sleep until everyone was in its place. Household staff remembered her as careful, dutiful, a little serious for her age. She did not test the rules, she learned them and kept them. If you told Elizabeth that something was her responsibility, she carried it as though it weighed something real. Margaret arrived 4 years later, in 1930, and she was, by every account, the opposite. Quick, funny, sharp beyond her years. She could sit at the piano and pick out a tune by ear. She could mimic the voices of visitors after they left. She could deliver a line with the timing of someone 3 times her age. She was the child who made her mother laugh out loud, and that laughter mattered because the Duchess of York was a woman who loved to be entertained. In the nursery world, before any crown entered the picture, Margaret ran the room. Staff described her staying up when she should have been in bed, performing songs for the dinner guests, holding the floor while the adults indulged her. She was allowed things, she got away with things, and nobody minded because she was delightful, and because a delightful child is very hard to discipline. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was held to a quieter, higher standard, not scolded more, held more, expected of more. The difference was subtle, and it was constant. When Margaret misbehaved, it was charming. When Elizabeth slipped, it was noticed. One daughter was being enjoyed, the other was being prepared, and at the time, nobody in that house could have told you what she was being prepared for. Then came 1936, and everything the family had assumed about its own future came apart in a matter of weeks. Elizabeth and Margaret's uncle was King Edward VIII. He had come to the throne that January, and he was in love with a twice-married American woman named Wallis Simpson, and the 2 things could not coexist. The King of England was also head of the Church of England, and the Church did not recognize the remarriage of divorced people while their former spouses still lived. Edward was told he could have the crown or he could have Wallace. He could not have both. In December of 1936, he chose Wallace. He signed the abdication and walked away from the throne, and in doing so he handed it, without warning, to his younger brother, the Duke of York, Elizabeth and Margaret's father. A shy man with a bad stammer who had never wanted it and never expected it became King George VI almost overnight. And in that same moment, a 10-year-old girl's entire life changed shape. Because when George VI became king, his elder daughter became heir presumptive to the throne of the United Kingdom. Elizabeth, at 10 years old, was suddenly the future, not a princess in the ordinary sense, the next in line, the one it would all come down to. From that day, the two sisters were no longer just two sisters. They were raised for opposite fates. And this is the split that everything hangs on, so hold it clearly. One daughter would inherit a crown, and everything that came with it, the duty, the weight, the sacrifice of a normal life. The other would not. Elizabeth was destiny now. Margaret was company. You can watch the machinery change around them almost at once. Elizabeth was given tutors. She was taken to study constitutional history with the Vice Provost of Eton to learn how the monarchy actually worked, what a sovereign could and could not do. She was groomed, quietly and relentlessly, for a job that had a fixed and enormous shape. Her mother, who had once seemed to overlook her in favor of a ribbon, now poured something into her that looked a great deal like ambition. Margaret got none of that. No constitutional tutoring, no grooming for a role, because there was no role. She was left to be what she had always been, charming, musical, indulged. She kept the affection. She lost the seriousness. And at 4 years younger, she was old enough to feel the shift and too young to understand what it meant. Ask yourself which daughter you would rather have been, the one who was laughed with or the one who was prepared. It sounds like an easy question. It is not, because the one who was laughed with was also the one who was being quietly set aside, and the one who was prepared was being handed a life she could never put down. We do not have to guess about how this looked inside the house, because someone who was there wrote it down. Her name was Marion Crawford, and she was the governess who ran the schoolroom for both girls. The children called her Crawfie. She was with them daily for years, closer to their ordinary lives than almost anyone, and long after she left royal service she put her observations on paper to the fury of the family, who never forgave her for it. And Crawford's account is blunt. She wrote that the Queen, meaning the girl's mother, let Margaret get away with everything and expected everything of Elizabeth. Read that again slowly because it is the whole pattern in a single line. Everything forgiven for one daughter, everything demanded of the other. The indulgence went one way, the expectation went the other, and the governess who watched it happen every single day did not think it was accidental. Here is where the story starts to sharpen into something uncomfortable. Because on the surface, being the one who gets away with everything sounds like winning. Margaret was allowed to be late, to be loud, to be difficult, and it was all waved away with a smile. Who would not want that? But look at what it actually meant. To get away with everything is to be treated as though nothing you do carries weight. To be expected of everything is to be treated as though you matter enormously. Margaret got the affection, Elizabeth got the future, and in a royal family, the future is the only currency that finally counts. The household began to sense this before anyone would have dared say it aloud. The ladies in waiting, the women closest to the Queen in her daily life, the ones who saw her unguarded, started to notice which way her real investment ran. Her protectiveness, her planning, her genuine ambition, the deep, serious part of a mother that decides a child's life is worth building, all of it flowed toward Elizabeth, toward the crown, toward destiny. And the affection, the warmth, the delight, the kneeling in the drawing room to fix a ribbon that flowed toward Margaret, which felt, in the moment, like the greater love. A mother laughing with her youngest, tender over her hair, calling her the family's joy. Anyone watching would have said that little girl was cherished. She was. That is exactly the trap. She was cherished. She was simply never chosen. And a child can be adored across a dinner table every night of her life and still, at the level where the important decisions get made, come second every time. That is the contradiction the servants carried for decades and never quite solved. The mother who fussed over Margaret was building her whole hope around Elizabeth. She loved one daughter as company and the other as consequence. And for years in the nursery and the schoolroom and the drawing room, those two kinds of love ran side by side without ever colliding, because nothing yet forced a choice between them. But a choice was coming. Somewhere down the years, Margaret would fall in love with a man she could not have without her family's blessing, and she would turn to the mother who had knelt over her ribbon and called her a joy, and she would ask that mother to fight for her. And she would find out, in the worst possible way, the difference between being adored and being favored. We are not there yet. Before that reckoning, there are the ordinary years to account for, the long stretch when both girls were growing up under the same roof, and the pattern was quietly hardening into something permanent. Because as the sisters grew, the household watched the mother steer every serious decision toward Elizabeth and leave Margaret to be charming and boxed in. And the ladies in waiting, the ones who saw it closest, began to describe specific scenes. Scenes at the dinner table, scenes in the drawing room in the evenings. Small, repeating moments where you could see, night after night, exactly where the mother's ambition truly went, and exactly which chair at that table held her heart, and which one only held her laughter. Those dinner table scenes the ladies in waiting kept returning to told the same story every night. Margaret allowed to stay up long after she should have been in bed. Margaret led to the grand piano, small hands finding the keys, singing for a room of seated adults who leaned in and laughed on cue. She had timing. Even as a girl, she knew how to hold a room, when to pause, when to land the joke. The Duchess of York watched her youngest perform and, by every account that survives, glowed. One lady in waiting described it plainly. Margaret was the household's joy, not a figure of speech, the word people around the family actually used. She was the child brought out to charm visitors, the one whose mimicry of pompous guests sent the table into fits, the one her mother forgave everything because the forgiving cost so little and the entertainment was so good. And across the same table sat Elizabeth, older, quieter, watching. While Margaret sang, Elizabeth was already being shaped for something that had nothing to do with charm. There were tutors. There was constitutional history, the dry architecture of how the crown actually worked, the powers and the limits and the long-dead precedents. Marion Crawford, the governess the family called Crawfie, later wrote about the difference in how the two girls were handled. And the difference was not subtle. The Queen let Margaret get away with everything. From Elizabeth, she expected everything. Notice the pattern. Every laugh went to Margaret. Every decision went to Elizabeth. That is the whole story in one line. And once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. The affection and the ambition were pointed at two different children. Margaret got the warmth of the room. Elizabeth got the weight of the future. Two daughters, two opposite fates, one raised to be company, one raised to be destiny, and here is the part that unsettled the staff who noticed it. The mother seemed to pour her real self, her ambition, her protective instinct, her long game, into the daughter she fussed over least in public. When something serious came up, the future of the family, a question of duty, a decision that mattered, the Duchess did not turn to her sparkling younger girl. She turned to Elizabeth. Quietly, every time. Margaret was adored. Elizabeth was invested in. Those are not the same thing, and a child feels the difference long before she can name it. By the time the girls were teenagers, the roles had set like plaster. Elizabeth was the heir, and everyone in the household treated her as the future of the crown itself, because after 1936, that is exactly what she was. Her father had become King George VI almost by accident, dragged onto the throne by his brother's abdication, and the shy man with the stammer never wanted it, but he wore it, and he passed its whole gravity down to his elder daughter, with his wife steering every step. Think about what that did to a house. One daughter was being prepared for the most public life imaginable, drilled in the machinery of monarchy, told without words that her wishes would always come second to the institution. The other was left free, free to be funny, free to be indulged, free to stay up and perform and dominate the conversation, precisely because nothing serious was ever going to be asked of her. From the outside, that looked like favouritism running toward Margaret. And in one sense it was. She got the affection, the latitude, the laughter. But look closer, the way the ladies-in-waiting looked closer, and you see what she did not get. She did not get the mother's serious attention. She did not get the grooming, the future, the sense that her life would matter to the country. She got the pet's place at the table, cherished, never chosen. Then came the war, and the two fates hardened into something permanent. While the bombs fell on London, the sisters were kept at Windsor Castle. Even there the pattern held. Elizabeth, approaching adulthood, was pushed toward duty. She trained as a mechanic and driver with the women's service near the war's end, in uniform, learning to change a tire and read an engine because the heir had to be seen sharing the country's hardship. Margaret, 4 years younger, stayed the entertainer. She put on pantomimes at the castle, played the lead, sang, made her family laugh through the blackout. The elder rehearsed for responsibility, the younger rehearsed for applause, and when the war ended, the settling began. Elizabeth married. In 1947, she wed Philip, a naval officer, and became a wife, then a mother, the settled future of the family made flesh. Her path was drawn straight ahead of her, thrown at the end of it, and the whole institution arranged itself around that line. She had somewhere to go, and everyone knew where. Margaret had nowhere to go. She was dazzling now, a young woman photographers chased, the most glamorous face in London after the drab war years, quick and beautiful and everywhere. But she was still the second daughter, unanchored. There was no throne waiting, no defined role, no serious purpose the family had built for her. She was the sister of the future queen, and that was a description, not a life. The very freedom that once looked like a gift had become a kind of drift. All that charm, and nothing solid to fasten it to. The household could see her circling, waiting for her own life to begin, and then, in one stroke, everything the family had prepared for arrived, and everything Margaret quietly had vanished. George VI died in 1952. He died in his sleep at Sandringham, worn out by the crown he never wanted and the illness that had eaten at him. He was 56. His elder daughter was in Kenya when the news reached her. She had left England, a princess, and she came home a queen. Elizabeth became queen the moment her father's heart stopped, without a ceremony, without a choice, exactly as she had always been told she would. For Elizabeth, it was grief and coronation braided together. For Margaret, it was something colder and lonelier that the country barely registered at the time. Look at the photographs from that winter. 3 black-clad women behind the coffin, veiled, still, the old Queen Mary, the widow, now the Queen Mother, and Margaret. She had lost her father, and by every account he had been the one person in that family who simply enjoyed her, who did not measure her against a throne, who loved the joy she was without asking her to be anything else. And in the same instant, she lost her place in the household. The sister she had grown up beside was now the monarch. Where Margaret had been the king's cherished younger daughter, a person with weight in her own home, she was now the queen's sister, a satellite, one step removed from the center of everything. Her father gone, her status halved, her purpose thinner than ever. She was 21, and she had never needed her mother more. And it is precisely here, in this raw window after the king's death, that Margaret fell in love. Not with a suitable prince, not with a duke the family could parade. She fell in love with Group Captain Peter Townsend, a divorced equerry. He was 16 years older, a decorated Royal Air Force pilot, a Battle of Britain hero. Handsome in the quiet, steady way that draws people who have had too much noise. He had served her father closely, part of the royal household for years. Always there, always calm, a fixture in the uniformed staff who moved through the palace corridors. And he was married. Or he had been. His marriage broke down, and by the time Margaret's feelings settled on him, he was divorced. That single word, divorced, was a wall in 1952. To the Church of England, whose supreme governor was now Margaret's own sister, a marriage to a divorced man with a living former wife was close to impossible. To the firm, the tight machine of courtiers and advisers who managed the monarchy's image, Townsend was a scandal waiting to detonate. The very same institution that had cast out Edward VIII for wanting to marry a divorced woman was not about to bless the king's daughter doing something the family thought it had buried 16 years earlier. Margaret knew all of it. She was not naive. She knew the church, she knew the firm, she knew what her uncle's abdication had cost the family, but she believed she had one card the abdication crisis never had. She believed she had her mother, because here is what friends of Margaret said, and said with real certainty. Margaret believed her mother would defend her, not hoped, believed. This was the woman who had fussed over her ribbon in the drawing room at Royal Lodge, who had called her the family's joy, who had let her get away with everything for 20 years. If any door in the world would open for Margaret, surely it was that one. If any person alive would stand up and fight for her happiness, it would be the mother who had adored her longer and louder than anyone. And this is the moment the favouritism stops being harmless. Watch what the mother does now, because for 2 decades the pattern had cost Margaret nothing real. Being the pet instead of the heir, being cherished for company rather than shaped for destiny, that had actually looked like the better deal. She got the laughter, the late nights, the freedom. She got to be loved out loud. The imbalance the staff had whispered about was, until now, a soft thing, almost a kindness. The favourite child indulged and forgiven. But favour that only ever comes as warmth is untested favour. It has never had to pay for anything. It has never stood between the child and real danger. And now, for the first time in her life, Margaret was in real danger of losing the one thing she actually wanted, and she was about to find out what all that adoration was worth when it was finally asked to do something hard. The trap was already closing, and it closed from 3 directions at once. There was the divorce itself, the plain fact of Townsend's past that no amount of love could erase. There was the church, unbending, with Elizabeth herself bound to it as monarch. And there was the firm, the courtiers who saw only risk, moving quietly in the background to manage the problem the way they managed everything, by making it go away. The whole household held its breath. The ladies-in-waiting who had watched the mother fuss over Margaret for 20 years, who had seen every laugh go to the younger girl, now watched a different question form in the air. Would she do it? Would the mother who adored Margaret finally spend that adoration, finally turn her formidable will toward protecting the daughter instead of merely enjoying her? They had seen where her ambition went. They had seen it flow year after year toward Elizabeth, toward the crown, toward destiny. But surely affection was its own force. Surely a mother who had loved this daughter so visibly, so tenderly, would find in that love the will to fight. Margaret thought so. She staked everything on it. So Margaret went to the one person she was sure would stand between her and the machinery of the crown. Her mother. The woman who had fussed over her ribbon and called her the family's joy. The woman whose warmth had followed her through every room of her childhood. She went to her with the whole of her hope, certain, absolutely certain, that here at last the favourite would be protected as well as loved. And what the Queen Mother did in that house was not to argue, it was not to plead, it was not to intervene. She did the single thing Margaret never forgave. She said nothing. That was the intervention, that was the whole of it. The woman who had crossed a drawing room to fix a ribbon in this girl's hair, who had called her the family's joy, who had let her stay up past midnight to finish a song at the piano, sat inside her own household, while the man her daughter loved was quietly filed out of reach, and she did not lift a finger to stop it. Biographers who have gone through the papers agree on this point, and it is a strange one. The Queen Mother stayed silent and moved Townsend's posting. Not with a slammed door, not with a scene, with paperwork and patience and the good manners that made the whole thing look like nobody's decision at all. Group Captain Peter Townsend had been the king's equerry, a decorated pilot, steady and admired inside the house. He was also divorced, and in the Church of England of the early 1950s, with Margaret's own sister now the supreme governor of that church, a divorced man was not a suitor, he was a problem. So Townsend was posted to Brussels as air attaché, sent across the channel, out of the palace and out of the daily reach of the woman who loved him. 2 years, they were told. Wait 2 years, and perhaps. And all through those 2 years, the machinery of the firm did exactly what machinery does. Slowly, without malice you could point at. Government ministers weighed in, the church weighed in, the press circled, and then landed. Margaret, if she married him, would likely have to give up her royal rights, her income, her place in the line. Every door she reached for was found, on inspection, to be already locked. And behind all of it, in the one house where a mother might have stood up and said, "Enough, leave the girl alone," there was only that composed and terrible quiet. Here is what makes the silence land so hard. It was a choice. Doing nothing in a family like that was never neutral. The Queen Mother had spent 20 years steering serious decisions with a raised eyebrow and a private word. She knew exactly how to move a thing when she wanted it moved. She had moved Townsend's posting after all. What she would not do was move the world an inch in Margaret's favour. The daughter she fussed over got, at the moment she needed it most, the back of her mother's silence. In 1955, Margaret gave up Townsend. She was 25. On the last day of October that year, she put out a public statement, and if you have ever seen the newsreel of it, the thing that stays with you is how controlled she is. Mindful of the Church's teaching, she said, and conscious of her duty to the Commonwealth, she had resolved not to marry. She had, she wrote, reached this decision entirely alone. Entirely alone. Those 2 words did a lot of work. They took the pressure off the Church, off the government, off her sister the Queen, and off the mother sitting in silence at Clarence House. Margaret carried the whole weight of it in public by herself, and let everyone else keep their clean hands. A friend of hers said, years later, that Margaret never fully forgave the silence in that house. Not the Church, not the ministers, not even, in the end, her sister, who at least had a throne and a coronation oath to hide behind. The silence, the specific, personal, motherly silence of the one person who was supposed to be on her side and simply was not. You can be angry at an institution. It is harder, and it lasts longer, to be quietly wounded by your own mother. So let's stop and look at what actually happened here, because it is the heart of the whole thing. The favouritism was real. Everyone in the household saw it. Margaret was the one the Duchess laughed with, the pet. The child called her joy. That was not a rumour, and it was not cruelty. It was genuine, warm, daily affection, poured on the younger daughter for 30 years. But affection is not the same as investment, and this is where people get the story wrong. The Queen Mother loved Margaret as company. She loved Elizabeth as destiny. Those are 2 completely different kinds of love, and for most of 2 lifetimes they never had to compete. You can adore the funny one at dinner and prepare the steady one for the throne, and nothing forces you to choose between them. Until something does. Until the funny one falls in love with the wrong man and comes to you, at last, needing you to fight. And in that one moment, when company and destiny finally stood in the same room and pulled in opposite directions, the mother chose destiny, every time, without hesitation, because protecting the crown, protecting the line, protecting the version of the family the public was allowed to see mattered more to her than the happiness of the girl whose hair she used to fix. There it is. The favourite to laugh with, never the favourite to protect. That is the paradox the title promised you, and now you can hold both halves of it at once. Margaret was cherished, truly, visibly, for her whole life, and Margaret was never chosen. When it counted, when a single word from her mother might have changed the shape of her entire future, the word never came. Cherished, but never chosen. The younger sister got the affection, and the older sister got the future, and in the family arithmetic of the House of Windsor, the future always won. Now, before you close the book on the Queen Mother as a cold woman who sacrificed her daughter, slow down, because that is too easy, and it is not quite true. remember where she had been standing. This was a woman who never expected any of it. She had married the shy second son, Prince Albert, Duke of York, the one who stammered and would never be king, and she had thought she was marrying into a quiet life on the edges of the royal family. Then, in 1936, Edward VIII walked away from the throne to marry Wallis Simpson, an American, twice divorced, and the whole weight of the crown crashed down onto her nervous husband, who had never been trained for it and did not want it. She watched the abdication do that to him. She watched a man be broken and remade by a job he never asked for. Many close to her believed she never forgave Edward for it and never forgave Wallis at all. So look at Margaret in 1955 through that mother's eyes. A royal wanting to marry across the line the church had drawn, willing to give up rank and income and place for love. To the Queen Mother, that was not a new and romantic idea. That was Edward VIII all over again. That was the exact road that had led to abdication, to exile, to a couple drifting round the hotels of Europe with a title and no country, cut off from everything that had made them who they were. She had seen where that road ended, and it is entirely possible, likely even, that her silence was not indifference at all, that she genuinely believed she was saving Margaret from becoming another exile, another cautionary tale, another Windsor washed up in France with nothing but a grievance. That is sympathy. It is not absolution. Because even if every one of her fears was reasonable, the fact remains that she let her daughter fight the hardest battle of her life without her, and she let Margaret stand up in public and say she had decided it all alone. A frightened, loving mother can still leave a wound that never heals. Both things are true. The Queen Mother was protecting a daughter from the abyss she had seen swallow Edward, and she was abandoning a daughter in the same breath. History is allowed to hold her responsible for both, and the two women lived a long time inside that unfinished thing. Margaret never really recovered the joy the household remembered from her girlhood. She married Anthony Armstrong Jones a few years later, and it ended badly, publicly, the first royal divorce of that generation. There were the parties, the cigarettes, the long lunches, the reputation for being difficult. Staff who saw her in the last decade saw a woman who was often alone in a room full of family, seated a little apart, watching. The dazzle was still there when she wanted it, but underneath it, people who knew her sensed something that had been set in place back in that house of silence and never quite came out. And here is the detail that undoes you, if anything in this story does. Staff who watched both women grow old said that Margaret, near the end of her life, still spoke of her mother with tenderness, not with rage, not with the cold contempt you might expect from a woman who felt abandoned, with tenderness, a wounded kind, yes, the tone catching sometimes on the wound, but tenderness all the same. The tone, one observer said, of a child who was cherished but never chosen, and who spent a lifetime unable to decide which of those two facts was the truer one. Think about what that costs, to love the person who let you down, to defend her out of habit and instinct, even while some part of you is still standing at that press statement, saying the words entirely alone and knowing they were not. The Queen Mother lived to 101. Margaret died before her in 2002, worn down by strokes, and the mother outlived the daughter she had called her joy. Whatever was unsaid between them stayed unsaid to the end. There was never a scene of reconciliation, because in that family there were never scenes, only the quiet. The same quiet that had settled over the Townsend years, settling now over everything. If these stories are the kind that stay with you, the ones about the family you think you know and the private truths the household saw, then following this channel costs you nothing, and there are more of them ready to go. Turn on the bell and they will find you. Now let me take you back to where we started, back to the drawing room at Royal Lodge in the mid-1930s, back to the lady-in-waiting who never forgot the small thing she watched that afternoon. The Duchess of York, bending down, fixing a ribbon in one daughter's hair, murmuring to her, "Close and warm." And the other daughter, the elder, standing a step away, watched over calmly, without cruelty and without fuss. At the time, it looked like nothing. A mother tidying a child, the most ordinary gesture in the world. But now you know which daughter was which. The one whose ribbon she fixed, the one she leaned in close to, was Margaret, and Margaret spent the rest of her life feeling like the second daughter in more than birth order, watching her sister receive the tutors, the preparation, the seriousness, watching Elizabeth receive the sacrifice, the duty, the long, lonely training for a crown, and finally, watching Elizabeth receive the throne itself and the whole world's attention, and the mother's deepest, most protective, most serious love, the kind that fixes nothing so small as a ribbon because it is too busy building a queen. The daughter with the ribbon got the fussing. The daughter without it got the future. And if you had asked either of them in an honest moment which one they would have chosen, you already know the answer, because Margaret told us with her whole life. So which sister did the Queen Mother truly love more? The servants who watched both women grow old never settled this question. See if you can. Because the honest answer might be that she loved them both, completely, and in two languages that could not be translated into each other. One love was laughter across a dinner table. The other was the willingness to give up your own child's happiness to keep her, as you saw it, from ruin. Which of those is the greater love? The warm one that fails you when you need it, or the cold one that saves you and breaks your heart doing it? The household never agreed. The family never said. And the two women at the center of it went to their graves without, as far as anyone knows, ever putting it into words to each other. Did she ever tell either daughter the truth? Did she ever sit with Margaret once and say what the silence had cost her to keep? Did she ever tell Elizabeth that the seriousness was its own kind of love, the deepest she had? There is no letter that says so, no witness who heard it, no record in any papers that the truth of that house was ever spoken aloud inside it. All that is left is the picture, an empty drawing room at Royal Lodge, the afternoon light going, and somewhere in it, small and bright and ordinary, a child's hair ribbon, cherished but never chosen, two daughters, two loves, two fates, and a mother's silence that outlasted every one of them, still sitting in that quiet room, still refusing, even now, to tell us which child she truly chose.